Some doors are better left unopened. Tonight, we're stepping inside one of the most haunted hospitals in America. What you're about to see isn't just abandoned walls, it's the screams, shadows, and secrets that never left. Before you think you know fear, let me show you a side of upstate New York that most people never see. These abandoned places aren't just old buildings, they're echoes of lives forgotten, screams frozen in time, and shadows that still wander the halls. I've been inside them, felt the air grow heavy, and heard whispers that shouldn't exist. Tonight, I'll take you through 5 haunted places you should never visit, and by the time this video ends, you'll question whether these stories are history or something much closer to reality. Watch closely, because once you enter, you can't turn back. If you love real haunted stories and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me on every spine-chilling adventure. 1 Utica State Hospital, New York, USA. It was a gray, misty afternoon when I first arrived at the gates of Utica State Hospital. The rusted metal creaked under my hands as I pushed it open, the sound echoing down the empty streets like a warning. I had read the stories, patients who never left, screams that haunted the corridors, shadows that moved on their own, but nothing prepared me for the weight that hit me the moment I stepped inside. The air was thick with decay, a mixture of damp wood, mold, and something else, something I couldn't identify. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow it whole. The hallways were endless, walls lined with peeling paint, and every step I took produced a groan from the wooden floorboards. I could hear faint scratching noises echoing from somewhere deep in the building. At first, I told myself it was rats. But as I moved forward, the scratching turned into footsteps, slow, deliberate, and matching my pace. I reached the main ward, the place where hundreds of patients had once lived in cramped, cold rooms. The beds were twisted, sheets rotted away, but something lingered. A shadow flitted across the far wall, just at the edge of my vision. I froze. My heart was pounding, and the air felt heavier, almost alive. I could hear a whisper, soft at first, like the wind, but then clearer, calling my name. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty, silent hall. I continued, forcing myself toward the therapy room I had read about in old reports. It was there, they said, that the most disturbed patients had been kept. I felt a sudden chill, the temperature dropping so fast my breath became visible. My flashlight flickered, then went out for a brief second, and in that moment, I saw a figure at the end of the hall. Tall, shadowy, and impossible to describe fully. I blinked, and it was gone, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Then came the whispers. Dozens of them, overlapping, some crying, some angry, some begging. The sound seemed to crawl along the walls, coming closer with every step I tried to take back. My hands shook as I fumbled with the flashlight, finally getting it to shine again. The beam caught something I will never forget, scratch marks on the walls, fresh and deep, like claws had torn through the paint just moments ago. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the long hall, but the building seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. Behind me, I could hear the footsteps, always matching mine, never overtaking, never falling behind. I reached the front doors, pulled with every ounce of strength I had, and finally burst into the fading light outside. I gasped for air, chest burning, my legs barely holding me up. I looked back at Utica State Hospital. The windows were dark, the walls silent, but I could feel it, the building had watched me leave, but it would remember me. Some stories, I realized, aren't just legends. Some places keep their secrets, and Utica State Hospital keeps them all. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, I feel the chill, and I know that building isn't just empty. It's alive, in a way that no one should ever test. 2 Letchworth Village, Thiels, New York, USA. It was a cloudy, cold afternoon when I finally reached Letchworth Village. The path leading to the abandoned buildings was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the trees swayed in a way that made shadows dance across the broken pavement. I had read stories about this place for years, whispers from locals about the cries of children who were said to have been neglected here. My curiosity pulled me forward, but a knot of unease had formed deep in my stomach the moment I stepped onto the grounds. The main building loomed ahead, its windows shattered and dark, its walls peeling with age. As I entered, the smell hit me first, a mix of mold, rust, and something else, something faintly metallic that made my stomach churn. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, and the sound of my own footsteps echoed back at me like a warning. The halls were long, narrow, and lined with doors that led to rooms where children once lived, some for their entire lives. I moved slowly, my eyes scanning the cracked floors and broken furniture. There was something almost tangible in the air, a heaviness that pressed against my chest. Then I heard it, a soft, almost childlike giggle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart jumped into my throat, but I forced myself to follow the sound down a hallway lined with peeling paint and broken windows. The room I entered was one I had read about in old records, where children were reportedly punished and sometimes locked away. The air was colder here, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. On the walls were scratches, faint but deep, as if something had tried to escape. I could hear whispers now, dozens of tiny voices overlapping, some pleading, some angry, some sad. I felt my hands tremble and my stomach tighten as I realized the stories were not just rumors. There was something alive in this building. I turned to leave, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows curling and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. The giggling grew louder, mixed with the soft sobs of children I could almost feel pressing against my mind. I shone my flashlight down another hallway and saw a shadow move at the edge of the light, small, quick, and impossibly real. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Finally, I burst through the main doors into the dim afternoon light. The cold air outside hit me like a wave, and I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. I looked back at Letchworth Village, its windows dark and silent, and I felt something watching me, almost disappointed that I had left. I knew then that this place held memories, horrors, and pain that no one should ever witness alone. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the giggling, the whispers, and the soft footsteps of children who never really left. 3 Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, New Jersey, USA. It was a chilly evening when I first arrived at Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep shade of gray, and the building rose before me like a dark monument from another time. I had read about this place for years. Patients locked inside, cruel treatments, whispers of strange happenings, and yet, nothing could prepare me for the heaviness I felt the moment I stepped onto the grounds. The main building's windows were broken, letting in the cold wind that whistled through the halls. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, and every step I took on the cracked floor echoed like a warning. I could smell damp wood, rust, and something faintly chemical, lingering in the air. The stories of shadows moving on their own, of voices that spoke without a person, flashed through my mind. I told myself to stay calm, but my chest tightened with each step forward. As I walked through the first corridor, I noticed old hospital beds lined up along the walls, rusted and tipped over. Some sheets were still clinging to the frames, decayed and yellowed. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails against the walls. My heart jumped, and I froze. The sound stopped for a moment, only to be replaced by soft whispers, almost too quiet to hear. I strained my ears and realized they were saying names, patient names I had seen in old records. I moved carefully into what had once been the therapy room. The air felt colder here, heavier, almost pressing against my skin. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, I thought I saw a shadow move across the corner of the room. My stomach dropped. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, some pleading, some angry, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. It was impossible to tell where the sounds were coming from, they were all around me. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, following mine exactly. I turned, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. I could feel a presence behind me, almost brushing against my back. My hands shook as I held the flashlight tighter. At that moment, a door at the far end of the corridor slammed shut with a deafening bang, making my ears ring and my heart leap into my throat. I knew I had to leave. I ran through the endless hallways, the building seeming to stretch impossibly as the footsteps followed. Finally, I burst through the front doors into the fading light of evening. I gasped, trying to catch my breath, feeling the weight of the building lift but not completely disappear. I looked back once, and the dark windows seemed to stare at me, almost aware, almost angry that I had left. Even now, days later, I can still hear the whispers in my mind, the scratches, and the footsteps. Greystone Park is not just a building, it is a living memory of pain and suffering, holding on to every story, every shadow, every voice that ever existed within its walls. And I will never forget what I felt inside. For Danvers State Hospital, Massachusetts, USA. It was late evening when I arrived at Danvers State Hospital, the sky a dull gray and the wind carrying an icy chill that seemed to crawl into my bones. The main building loomed ahead, its Gothic towers dark against the fading light. I had read about the place for years, the cruel treatments, the whispers of patients who had vanished, the shadowy figures wandering the halls, but nothing prepared me for the weight of silence that greeted me as I stepped onto the cracked pavement. The front doors were heavy and groaned loudly as I pushed them open. Inside, the smell of mold and decay was overpowering, mixed with the faint, metallic scent of old blood I could almost imagine. My flashlight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows down the narrow hallways. Each step I took echoed like a warning, and I could feel the building watching me. The stories of sudden cold spots and unexplainable noises flashed through my mind, but my curiosity kept me moving forward. I entered one of the old wards, where rows of beds once held patients, many of them children or teens who had been subjected to harsh treatments. The sheets had long decayed, the metal frames twisted and rusted. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, and the air seemed heavier here, almost suffocating. Then I heard it, a soft whisper calling my name, barely audible, yet unmistakably real. My heart pounded, and my hands shook as I shined my flashlight toward the corner of the room. A shadow flitted across the wall, too fast to catch fully, but I felt its presence, cold and watchful. The whispering grew louder, overlapping, as if multiple voices spoke at once. Some were pleading, some angry, some crying. My chest tightened, and I felt a strange urge to run, but something, fear or fascination, I couldn't tell, kept me rooted to the spot. I moved toward the hallway, trying to keep calm, but the corridor seemed endless, stretching further than it should. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, echoing mine exactly. I turned, but the hallway was empty. My flashlight flickered again, and a door slammed shut at the far end with a deafening bang that made my ears ring. Panic surged through me. I ran, my footsteps echoing, the building almost alive, chasing me, guiding me, or warning me, something I couldn't understand. When I finally burst out into the cold night air, my legs weak, my heart racing, I looked back. Danvers State Hospital stood silently, its dark windows staring like eyes. I felt a presence lingering, disappointed that I had left so soon. Even now, days later, I can't shake it, the whispers, the shadows, the cold pressure on my chest. Danvers State Hospital doesn't just remember, it waits, and it never forgets. 5 Penhurst Asylum, Pennsylvania, USA. It was a gray, overcast afternoon when I first stepped onto the grounds of Penhurst Asylum. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The asylum's walls towered over me, dark and imposing, like they had been waiting for me to arrive. I had read countless stories about this place, the mistreatment of patients, the cries that echoed through the halls, and the shadows people claimed to see. But nothing prepared me for the weight of history pressing down as I walked toward the main entrance. The doors groaned as I pushed them open, a sound that seemed to awaken the building itself. Inside, the smell of mold and old wood was overwhelming, mixed with a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and narrow, lined with doors to rooms that once held patients, some of them children who had spent years locked inside. My flashlight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. Every step I took echoed loudly, almost as if the building were aware of my presence. I reached the first ward, where the beds were still arranged in rows, their metal frames rusted and twisted. Sheets had long decayed, and the walls bore scratches that looked almost fresh, though I knew they must have been old. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft whisper, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. My heart jumped, and I spun around, flashlight beams sweeping every corner. Nothing. The silence was thick, almost unbearable, but then came another sound, a low, dragging step, deliberate and slow, following me exactly as I moved. I forced myself forward, trying to stay calm. I entered a therapy room that had been used decades ago for treatments that were rumored to be cruel and experimental. The air here was colder, unnaturally so, and I could see my breath hanging in front of me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, some pleading, some angry. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine as the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of my vision. My hands shook, but curiosity kept me moving, even as fear gripped my chest like a vice. Then came a sudden slam, a door at the far end of the corridor banged shut, echoing like thunder through the halls. My flashlight flickered violently, and I swear I saw a figure move just at the edge of the light, small and fleeting, almost human but impossibly fast. My heart raced, and adrenaline surged through me. I ran down the hallway, every footstep echoing behind me as though something was chasing, guiding, or mocking me. Finally, I burst through the front doors into the cold afternoon air, gasping for breath. Penhurst Asylum sat silently behind me, its dark windows like eyes watching me leave. Even now, I can still hear the whispers, the soft dragging footsteps, and the cold pressure on my chest. Penhurst is not just abandoned. It is alive in memory, holding every shadow, every scream, every secret that ever existed within its walls. And I know I will never forget it.